Liberation of Sundrian City by Andrew Lewis. Chapter 11. Time runs out. No one slept. Blood coursed rapidly through their veins and thoughts dashed about through their minds, restless and unrelenting. Linus tried to enter a meditative state, sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed, but there was no peace for him. Flower was swept into such a frenzy of hysteria that he began to hyperventilate, and eventually he dashed his own head against the stone wall for relief, knocking himself unconscious. Wesley sat in the meditative pose too, trying to tap into the peace that he thought that Linus was experiencing, but apparently to the same avail as Linus. He shifted and shuddered uncontrollably, unable to convince anyone, including himself, that he wasn't utterly on edge. The guard kept his composure better than anyone else, chuckling incredulously to himself as if amused by the injustice of a palace guard being sentenced to death. Linus almost envied the fact that the guard did not have the hope in hell of surviving. His fate was set, and there was no point in worrying. Hours crawled by. The bucket in the corner overflowed, and Linus had vomited numerous times. Flower had awoken and lay face down crying and groaning desperately. There was no consoling him anymore. Then the doors opened. The keeper walked in, followed by a line of 4 guards. It was too soon. Linus wasn't ready. The bars were slit open and the keeper and the guards came into the dungeon. Flower began to scream madly. One by one, the 4 prisoners were relieved of their shackles and taken at sword's edge by a guard each, back out through the door, then through the room where the keeper resided, and into the winding labyrinth of tunnels. As they marched along, Linus could hear Flower whimpering somberly, gasping occasionally from somewhere behind him. But he kept his eyes on Wesley, who walked ahead of him. For although he did so on trembling legs, he moved proudly, as if his honour was his guide. Linus focused on Wesley's walk and tried to mimic it as best he could. Eventually they came to a small room which was narrow and elongated, with a stone bench along one side. The 4 prisoners were sat side by side along the bench, the stony-faced guards moving into position along the entrance. "This is it," said Linus. "This is the end." He turned to look at Flower, who shuddered violently and clawed at the stone bench. Further along the bench, Churned, still just in his underwear, sat hunched over with his head down near his lap, both hands covering his face. His pale legs quivered incessantly. From fear or cold, it wasn't certain. But when Linus looked to his left, he saw that Wesley sat quite calm, managing to stifle his trembling quite effectively, and Linus was thankful to have someone whom he could rely on for some stability of character in such an unnerving time. "Wesley," he pleaded. "I'm here, Linus," he responded, a faint smile brushing over his face. "It's okay." "But Wesley, I don't think—" "I know, Linus, I know." And with that, he put an arm around Linus and squeezed him tight in a strong embrace like a good parent would. And in that moment, Linus suddenly realized how thoroughly alone he was, and he broke into tears. While he sat, with his face buried in Wesley's shoulder, shivering uncontrollably from fear and panic, Linus remembered the man who had run at the elephant and been killed within seconds, and now he entirely understood the man's approach. His mind was all but set upon this tactic when Wesley spoke, apparently having read Linus's mind. "Now, Linus, we haven't much time, but son, you can't just give in. You, out of all of us here, have the best chance of surviving this." "Me?" replied Linus, who could see no possible way this could be true. He was a 13-year-old boy about to face a war elephant being ridden by an armed soldier who was set upon killing him slowly and painfully. "Yes, Linus, agility is the best defense in a trial, and you have it in spades, boy. If you can outrun the beast until the timer ends, you're free to go." The brief spark of hope that had flickered in Linus's heart was promptly extinguished. This advice to outrun the elephant was so very obvious to Linus that he felt angry with Wesley for making him momentarily hopeful. "I can't outrun an elephant, Wesley. The slowest of elephants could outrun the fastest man without even trying. It's useless," said Linus, a fresh wave of nausea washing over him. "At least try, Linus, for me, and for Jeremy." At that moment, A guard came through the door and strode over to Wesley, grasping him by the neck. "Lucky you," he said, as he wrenched him from his seat. "You're up first." As Wesley was taken to the door, he turned to Linus, whose face was pale as death, and said, "You can do this, Linus. Godspeed." And then he was gone. "God's feet!" yelped Flower, and he began to giggle more insanely than ever. "God's feet, Lina." "Please, Flower, stop," begged Linus, but it was no good. "God's feet," he chuckled. "God's feet, me and Lina and God's feet." Linus tried his hardest to block out Flower's agonizing madness. But before long, the same guard had come back into the room. Linus closed his eyes and waited for the hand to grab his shoulder, but it did not. Instead, Flower let out a squeal of laughter, and Linus opened his eyes to see him being dragged out of the room by the shirt. His face had gone beyond pale and turned to green. "God's feet!" he screamed, and even after he was taken away down the corridor, his screams echoed all the way back and found Linus's ears. "God's feet! Have me! Take me, God's feet!" The screams faded, and soon Linus was left in silence. "You must be next," said Churned from within his hands. Linus began to feel so nervous that it took all of his strength to stop himself from going insane. His slow, deep breaths rattled in his trembling chest. His heart fluttered somewhere nearby, and then, all too soon, the guard came in again. Linus stood up willingly before the guard could grab him, and he walked on trembling legs out and into the dark corridor.